Okay, we are live. Hello, everyone. This is Abdullah Samir. I'm joined by a really special guest, Shariq, in London, a good friend of mine that we met online and we hit it off and we have become best buddies, pen pals of sorts. The online, I don't even want to say like online atheist community because I don't feel like that's what connects the two of us. It's not like, yeah, we believe in no God together. Yeah, go atheism team. Like that's not what brings us together. That's not what we have in common. I'd like to think it's a lot more than that. And you will all find out. It's a general kind of mindset of you can call it free thinking, you can call it skepticism, whatever it is. This thing that binds us together, this pursuit of truth, interest in science, and in general, other things like that. So I would like to welcome Shariq. Hi, Shariq. How's it going?
Hi, Samir. Hi. Thanks for having me here. It's been a long time coming, man.
Yeah.
So really looking forward to this.
How are you feeling?
How's
It's
it?
it's a little bit late for you, right? It's like around 10 o'clock over there, and it's 5 o'clock here.
Ah,
So
that's fine. I'm wide awake at this time. Always been a night bird of sorts. So yes,
y-
that's all good.
you're a night owl. So
Yeah.
so tell us a little bit about yourself.
hmm
Just yeah.
So yeah, I'm here in London, like you said. I'm originally from India. I'm from Mumbai. A Bombay boy here in London. Been here for a while now, more than a decade. So this is pretty much home now. And you've sort of given a background into how we came across each other online. I think the thanks are due actually to Ali Rizvi, um, the atheist Muslim, the author of an atheist Muslim, who mentioned you online, and I did thank him for that thing personally, because yeah, I've learned a lot from you and obviously gotten to know you as a person. And but that was the first sort of hint I had that there's this guy who's worth listening to. And yeah, my interest in being here is really, yeah, it's the sort of things you described. It's a shared spirit of inquiry, I should say. um, an interest in secularism and the humanism. I would like to add that as well, and just sort of making the point that it's okay to move on from dogma. It's okay to move on from belief and let go of all those things, and just see how we could all be together. We don't have to fight about these things.
Nice, nice.
Yeah.
Now, how did you end up in this space of like skepticism? Like, were you obviously when you grew up, as a kid,
Mhm.
were your parents, did you pray? Did they make you pray at times? Or like how did you go from like growing up as a Muslim to where you are now?
I think it's almost been a lifelong journey. I don't think there was sort of any aha moment this way or that. I think I grew up in a pretty liberal, moderate, liberal Muslim family. Culturally more Muslim than anything else. It was just always there, not really something that defined us. Um, and no, as a child, I wasn't really expected to pray. My parents did sort of explain the basics of religion, made sure I could read the Quran. Well, you know what I mean by read, as in recite the Quran.
So was
Um,
it was
yeah.
it mainly like you said, reading the Quran, eating halal meat, the cultural markers around Eid and namaz once
Yes,
in a
the
while?
Eid and stuff, really. Halal, I think Muslims in India don't think too much about that because they just assume that everyone in the meat trade is Muslim anyway. So
Yeah,
I think
that's true.
it really actually just doesn't come up. And many people can be quite likely to be vegetarian. Even Muslims may be vegetarian most of the time, and they know their meat supplier who's Muslim. So it just, that thing doesn't come up so much as it does in the West. But yeah, in general, yeah, it was about Eid and festivals, family culture, sort of a North Indian. I grew up in Mumbai, but my roots are North Indian, so just sort of a broader North Indian culture. But mostly a very cosmopolitan upbringing. Other than that, um, as to how did I start getting towards skepticism? It's just because my dad's a scientist. I grew up surrounded by scientists, and
Oh, nice.
and that's always been sort of part of me. A lot of people were very disappointed when I didn't grow up to go down
Mm.
that path. So that sort of spirit of uh, inquiry, skepticism, rationality, I think that was hard coded from the very beginning. So
Oh,
I think
nice.
that's how I'd put it. But about Islam in particular, I think the first time ever that I really started to question things was as I was approaching my teens, if I remember correctly, or maybe even
Hmm.
my pre-teens, and I realized that music is supposed to be haram, and I was like, wait, hang on, where did that come from? This makes no sense. And my family loved music. Everyone loves music, and this is India and land of Bollywood, and even there's so many Muslims in the music business. Who've made millions. There are lyricists, there are singers, there are film stars, there are pop stars. Everyone's Muslim as well. So it didn't compute, and I couldn't really find any sort of basis for that. And that sort of remained a source of dissonance throughout. I still haven't really figured out why it's supposed to be so haram and so bad. But that's sort of, I think, from then on, I always had a sort of skeptical eye towards anything
Hmm.
related to the faith.
The music thing I
Mhm.
find interesting because there doesn't seem to be like a logical reason why music would be haram. Because, like, let's say the content of the music aside, so
Yeah,
if it's singing like, let's have sex, baby, or something like that's like
yeah,
obviously the content
I can
is
understand that. Yeah,
problematic. But like
yeah,
if it's just like, let's say, classical music, like,
yeah.
or even like, the Sufis sing
I was
qawwalis and
just going to
stuff.
come to that. I love qawwalis. I still listen to a lot of qawwali music, especially from Pakistan. I mean, I love that music, and that's very spiritual. Of course, sometimes they dabble in themes which could be questionable, but even when they're talking about wine or whatever, actually they're talking about devotion. I actually find that fascinating. But how did it become haram? And it's not haram if you use drums, and if you're just using drums with no. That sounds more pagan to me, and I just and I, this makes no sense.
Yeah, there's
So
quite a disagreement among, like, is it just percussion instruments? Is it all
yeah,
instruments?
yeah,
Is it allowed to only do it at weddings? And so
yeah.
there's a lot of confusion on that specific point. And it's one of the most questioned points in at most conferences I went to in Canada. It was like,
Oh, is it right?
it was about the meat. Is the meat, can I eat at McDonald's? And the music. People were really concerned about the music because it feels like we're quite hardwired, right, for the music. It has it
Yeah,
reverberates and it connects with us, and like you
yeah,
said, it can be very spiritual at times. So this was
yeah,
kind of like something that didn't click with you. So
yeah.
continue. What happened after that?
So it's just my dad encouraged me. He to explore that. He made me write into like an Islamic newspaper. I can't remember what it
Oh,
was called, Islamic Voice or something. And even he admitted it wasn't a very convincing answer that I got back. It was something because it keeps you from praying, and because it could be things that refer to shaitan and so that stayed with me, and it was I think from then on. But as I got older and I studied more and I tried to get deeper into the faith and sort of embrace it, started praying a bit more, not just show up for Eid or something. Um, that's when I started discovering more things that did not compute. And I think I tried for several years to reconcile that and sort of make sense of it. The sort of I think everyone goes through this phase of being an apologist, some very sophisticated apologetics, that burn doesn't necessarily mean burn, or, smite doesn't mean smite, and
yeah.
so. But yeah, that's how it started, and the more I tried to look for sense, the more it seemed to slip from my grasp, if that makes sense. That the
Wow.
more I saw, I was like, and that took years. I think that took years for me to finally accept. I think I spent a lot of time trying to make sense of this. And I think that was, well, I was well into my 30s when I finally accepted that
Oh, wow.
on myself.
It seems like you had a bit of a good influence from your dad.
I guess so. Yeah, I guess so. Who's, by the way, a very biased person. I mean, himself, he's a believer, and it's something, we discuss. And when he sees this, I don't know how he's going to react, um, but we've had these discussions for years, and we can always still have a sensible discussion about this. Then, which bits make sense, what's the value of these things, and where does it all stop making sense, and what do we do with that?
Mhm.
And I'm also fortunate in the people that I've been surrounded by, my extended family, not just my parents, but my extended family. They're all very educated people, well-educated people. There's all kinds of levels of practice and belief, but overall, everyone's pretty chilled out and not
Mhm.
really trying to force anyone else to do anything a
N-
certain way.
Nice.
But everyone's able to have a sort of discussion about things, even when people disagree. And not everyone is Muslim in my extended family. There are a few people married to people from different faiths, and in my generation internationally as well, including myself. So that sort of brings a different perspective. And also, ultimately, I think the overriding thing is it's India, and things just work a bit
Mhm.
differently in India. This pluralism is just taken for granted, and there's always loads of everybody else around you. You just sort of have to figure it out. So I think that sort of environment really helps.
Oh, yeah. I feel like maybe if I would have lived in a Muslim country, I don't know if I would have ended up leaving Islam, because I wouldn't have had that bigger perspective from, like different people. And I do think that growing up in Kenya, I had the same type of, I understand where you're coming from, because it was very
Mm.
multicultural. And my
Mhm.
family is also very like liberal and very accepting. So that helps a lot, doesn't it? Because nobody's kicking you out. Like, do you identify with them as ex-Muslim? Do you say you're ex-Muslim, or you don't say that? Like, how do you
I don't
navigate
really.
this?
I I don't really mention it. I don't think I've ever actually sat anyone down and explained this. People have drawn their conclusions over the years from what I say, and I'm not exactly quiet online.
Mhm.
Uh, but I don't think it matters that much, because there's
That's
also an
amazing.
aspect. Yeah, I don't. I think. I mean, this is, of course, I'm talking about myself. This is not necessarily everyone's experience.
Mhm.
Certainly, I don't mean to suggest that this is how it works for everyone in
Oh,
India.
yeah.
But it's. I think still in India, I think it's a bit easier, I would say, in many ways. The thing that gets complicated really is the identity aspect, because in Muslims obviously are a minority in India, and things have changed in recent years. When I was growing up, secularism was just sacrosanct. That was the propaganda that was drilled into us growing up in school and everything. I bought it, but I don't think everyone else did. And so things are a bit tricky now. There's a right-wing Hindu government in power, and the mood has changed a bit. So being Muslim also becomes about identity,
Mhm.
and that's what people hold on to a lot as well. So there may be a lot of people who don't really pray, who don't necessarily fast. They like their festivals, they like their biryani, they like the sort of culture around being Muslim, and but they're still Muslim, and they've not really explored the faith. They've not really gone deep down into it, because if you're not Muslim, then what else are you?
Yeah.
So in some ways, I feel that, to sort of counter what you said earlier, that if you were in a Muslim country, then maybe you might have remained Muslim. Maybe you might not have had to choose, because say you grow up in Iraq, for example, and you're an atheist, you don't really believe, but no one's really putting you on the spot to say, like, are you Iraqi or are you not? Because you're still Iraqi. The Muslim bit
Yeah.
is just sort of taken for granted. So I think these things also play into it. That's the identity aspect,
Mhm.
and which is something that I want to talk to more people about. That uh, to hold on to that identity. You don't really need to explain away all the stuff that doesn't make sense. So we need to evolve some way of keeping the identity, keeping the thing. There is some sort of shared Muslimness across cultures as well, which, someone from Morocco and someone from Malaysia, they may not have a lot in common, but they do have a few things in common.
Yeah.
And so that sort of thing, people should be able to enjoy that without having to stand up and try to explain away stuff that cannot be explained away. So
Yeah.
that's kind of where I come at it from.
So your family was quite, like easygoing in that sense, which is great. The
Hmm.
fact that it's not an issue whether you believe or not, I feel that in my extended family too, and I really love that. I think that's
Hmm.
just amazing. Why do you think that in India there's this kind of rise of the right? I mean, it's not only in India, it's also in the US. It's also
Yeah.
like it's all over the place. There's the far right. Like, what's going on with that? Like,
In India in particular, you mean?
in India, like US, like why do you think this is happening? We've in some places I feels like we're going backwards. It feels like we've gone from like tolerance and living together and like, like accepting each other to like kind of these barriers and this like this you're the other, and it feels like it feels like we're going backwards a bit sometimes, right?
Yeah, I think, and the same in the UK, by the way.
Oh
I've
yes.
only been here about 12, 13 years, but I've seen a change in the last 4 or 5 years. Just the nature of everything is just much more toxic.
Hmm.
But yeah,
Why is that?
India,
Like even
sorry.
even 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 like UK, if you want to talk about that instead, since
Yeah,
it's
either
very.
or. No, I can address both. Let's do UK first, for example. Um, I think the broad trend really is quite similar, whether you look at the US, whether you look at India, whether you look at the UK, whether you look at Turkey. I think the broad trend is quite similar. That I think these values of liberalism and secularism and sort of globalization, these were sort of thrust upon many people. I think felt that they didn't really ask for this, they didn't fully
Mhm.
understand this, and it was sort of foisted on them by the liberal metropolitan elite. By the way, I've been meaning to make a t-shirt for myself, like cosmopolitan liberal champagne drinking socialist elite or something like that, and proud, because that's I think that's where I get thrown by default. But anyway,
Okay.
so I think that's my explanation for this sort of thing. Even in India, there was a bit of that. There was a little bit of there was an extended experiment with socialism that Jawaharlal Nehru, Prime Minister of India for the longest period of time, carried on in the 60s and 70s. And I think the knock-on effect of that is now come to the front of
Mhm.
a more sort of conservative. And no one addressed the resentment. Obviously, India had centuries of Muslim rule, starting with invaders to somewhat more benevolent Mughal rulers. But that was never addressed in Indian history, because then the Brits came in, and then there was a whole independence struggle. But then people started going back to those previous resentments, and I think that's not been resolved. So in India, that's that reactionary bit, that reactionary revisionist politics. That's why it has taken root in my opinion. Um, and likewise in the UK, I think the more open borders, sort of more almost a nanny state. All those things just happened, and people didn't think that they were consulted. And eventually, then we had Brexit, and then and the whole discourse became very polarizing, and then that sort of spilled over into everything. And Brexit has never actually been about Europe, for example. I mean, it was always a proxy for just other divisions which were in British society, and immigration was a big part of it,
Mm.
which was also foisted upon, and many people didn't really think they understood it properly.
Mhm.
So I think the trends are quite similar in all the countries where things have gone a bit more. I do agree with you that we seem to have regressed, but I can also see where that's coming from.
Yeah. And what do you feel like the UK Muslim community and the Indian Muslim community? How would you compare the two of those?
Oh wow, that's an interesting one. So when I moved to the UK, I think that was the mid 2000s, 2005 or so. One of the things I was very interested to come here and see was that I thought maybe Muslims who've been living in the West for a long time now would have been sort of would have made their peace with the modern world and their faith. Because in India, I found that sometimes the stuff that Muslims, imams in particular, were droning on about had absolutely no relevance to my life. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the kind of Muslim obsessions of halal and haram and living a certain way, it just didn't seem very relevant to my life. I thought maybe people here figured this out. When I saw what the Muslim community in the UK is like, I was actually shocked. I was shocked by how insular and how close-minded it can be.
Oh
And
yeah.
again, I can understand it because again in India, when you are Indian and you don't have to hold on to anything, you just carry on being whatever kind of Muslim you are, and
Yeah.
nobody's gonna put you on the spot and try to um, figure out exactly how Muslim you are. People just decide it for you. Whereas in the UK, I think immigration and cultural identity and all those things get caught up into it, and also because this is a very densely England in particular is a pretty densely populated country, so everyone's thrown together, and the people who sort of move completely away, and the ones who are holding on to it really hold on to things, and I'm quite surprised sometimes by how narrow-minded. No, narrow-minded is not necessarily the word. Just really insular and inward-looking many Muslim communities in this country can be.
In what sense?
Um, in terms of trying to keep themselves distinct
Okay.
from the mainstream British population, it's a lot of
Mm.
us and them. That
Do
so
you,
it's live in our neighborhoods and things like
what
that.
like in Canada, like
Mhm.
I haven't seen a lot of that. Like what why is that happening over there? Like what's different? Like why are Muslim communities so insular in that sense? Is it because it's just like somebody and so you live in that same area and then somebody else comes in that same area and it ends up being all Muslim area, something like that? Or is it more like,
I mean,
they're
that should
more
apply. If that was the case, then that should apply everywhere. The question is, why does it happen less in North America, and why
Mhm.
does it happen? I think there are a few reasons for that. One is North America, the US, and Canada both are they are countries made up of immigrants by definition.
Yeah.
So, I mean, at least in theory, you can show up and you can become a US national, you become American, you become Canadian. There, of course, there's a racial dynamic to it, but you can become authentically American or authentically Canadian. Europe is different because these have been ethno states for the greatest period of time.
Okay.
That's it's The UK is slightly different because the history of immigration is a bit much longer in the UK, and been a bit more fluid than say Germany or France. But I think that's one aspect. You don't show up, you don't become English. People are always gonna ask you, well, where you from, or where's your family from? This from happens a lot. The more polite people ask, "Where's your family from?"
Yeah.
But I know people who were, they're second generation, third generation, but they still get asked. They sound completely British. They don't have any connection to India or Pakistan or wherever, but they still get asked. They're still immigrants. So that not necessarily. I'm just saying there's a certain sections of the population get it. Certain sections
Mhm.
of the population try extremely hard to work around that, and other sections, and sometimes they don't feel part of it. And a lot has changed. A lot has changed over the years. I think this country was very different in the 70s and 80s, which I didn't see. Maybe even in the early 90s, and there was a huge flood of immigration after that as well. And the 90s and 2000s, and the noughties, they made quite some efforts to integrate people. But I think in some ways they almost went overboard as well, in my opinion, and
Mhm.
sort of a babying of immigrants, especially if
Um.
Muslims, anything immigrants do is great. So I have my views about that. We can discuss that in detail if you know. But so I think so.
Yeah,
So
talk about that.
there was.
Like expand on that.
So I think there has been a sort of, in the leftist liberal circles in the UK, I think there has been a trend of, I think, babying immigrants a bit,
Mhm.
especially Muslims, that uh, let's not force people to assimilate, let people come, the cultures enrich us, which is fine.
Mhm.
But I think, for example, it's okay to expect people to speak English. It's really
Mhm.
okay to expect people to speak English in England, of all the places. And so sometimes when I go and I see public services, and there are
Urdu?
translations available in 15 different languages, and I'm like, there's, these 15 languages, I mean, 7 of them are from the subcontinent. I really think that's excessive. That's excessive.
Yeah,
I mean,
India's a country with like what, 50 languages or something, right? There's so many
of
different.
50 would be just scratching the surface of official languages, I think. So, literally, you can Urdu, Punjabi, Bengali, Gujarati, Hindi, of course, and then all the other languages: Arabic, Somali, Vietnamese, Polish, and a host of languages. So, I mean, yes, there's a point to be made that the first generation that comes in needs a bit more help. By the time you have the second generation, then they would have assimilated more. So if you take the broader that sort of stance, then that can over time filter through. But I don't know if that's been done with that sort of vision, whether anybody
Mhm.
followed that through. So I think that has contributed to more insular societies, more insular communities as well.
This kind of accommodating attitude, it comes from a good place, right? Like the
Yeah, of
idea,
course. Yeah.
but do you think like I feel like there's a lot of concern now that like the question is how tolerant should we be? Because excuse me, like you said, it's good. I think, I think maybe this is something that we as a society we need to come to terms with. Is it okay to expect people to speak English? I think that's very reasonable.
Mhm.
Another one would be like another very controversial one would be hijab, niqab.
Yeah.
Going around with your face covered in public. I don't know. Like, I don't know if we should ban it, but
Yeah.
it
I do
causes,
struggle with that one.
yeah, it
I,
causes barriers, right, between
yeah.
people. And the other thing is there's always going to be, there's also like there's definitely some middle ground, I think, of like which we need to hit, because what do you do if someone is preaching something that might be considered hate, but it's part of the religion? Should
Mhm.
it be banned? I personally don't think we should ban it. I think we should counter it with better arguments. But you
Always.
know,
Yeah.
you have groups like Hizb ut-Tahrir who are like trying pro Khalifa and they want to reestablish an Islamic State. They're not actually doing anything illegal per se, but they're also like, I feel like there has to be a counter to this, right? And sometimes if we don't speak up, people like me and yourself, and then what happens is you end up with the far right that's speaking up, but they're also like kind of demonizing large swaths of the population that
Yep.
may have nothing to do with that, with the problem
Yeah.
of extremism. Because like you said, many Muslims are very much cultural Muslims.
Yep.
They identify as Muslim, but not much else. Like they wouldn't be interested in Sharia law. They
Yeah.
might even disagree with Sharia law, and so
Absolutely.
there's definitely some sort of battle over the hearts and minds happening by these Islamists. That's what they are, the Islamists, and secularists, right? So like it's so like what do you think about that? Like this, the importance of secularism, and why is this like so important?
I absolutely agree with you. And, I might have left faith behind, and I'm, happy to sit down and have that sort of discussion. Is there a God, and does this make sense? But I think more important than resolving I think, yes, that debate should continue. But I
Hmm.
think more important than resolving that are actually secular values, because I think um, a secular democracy works for everyone, no matter what. It's the best protection for people of faith and people without faith, and every bit. That's the best umbrella, in my opinion, where everyone can sort of figure things out. But the rule there has to be that no one gets to dominate.
Hmm.
It's a bit tricky in this country, because this country is majority non-religious. More than 50% of people will tell you they don't really practice a faith. Some may be nominally, a lot may be nominally Christian, for example. But it's still, Church of England is officially the state religion, and the Queen is the head of the Church of England, which is all bizarre if you ask me. But for all practical purposes, it does, with some exceptions, it does function as a secular society. And I think that's what's that's what's more important to me. We have a secular fabric that sort of governs everything.
Mm-hmm.
Because what happens otherwise is that you can't have a sensible discussion about these things, as you said about this whole Islamophobia and bigotry against Muslims. Just if you don't mind, if I just touch upon very quickly how I feel about this
Mm-hmm.
Islamophobia, I think um, this word is just it just keeps cropping up every day in the press in the UK and everywhere these days. Um, which quite often is really about anti-Muslim bigotry, which I'm completely against, obviously, because people are people. When people do things that are bad, you call out the action. You don't start hating
Mm-hmm.
millions upon millions of people. When you can identify actions that relate to the faith, then yes, you should be able to say this is wrong in this faith, and that criticism should be possible. What ends up happening in practice is that people point at bigotry against Muslims, and vested interests use that to stop discussions about Islam and critique of Islam. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So that's the sort of thing that ends up happening, and then we're just left with the far right, and we're all sorts of posers and people looking for attention, who then end up doing the criticism, and it tends to be more anti-Muslim feeling
Mm-hmm.
than genuine, honest critique of faith and dogma and leaving things behind and building secular values. I think it all gets lost in there,
Yeah.
um, and that's why I think if there's a secular society, and if we can take that for granted as a non-negotiable, that there will be no special treatment for any faith, any sort of faith-based thinking, then we have a chance of getting somewhere and having a level playing field. So that's, I don't know
Absolutely.
if that answers the question. I went a bit here and there.
I
Yeah.
I kind of wish, like, same thing with like churches and stuff, mosques, Islamic schools. They all play by the same rules, and we don't have to pay into this. Giving them tax breaks, because yes, for
Mhm.
sure, I think religious organizations do a lot of good. Sometimes they do even more good, maybe, than secular organizations. But a lot of that money goes back into the religious preaching, and it just fuels itself. So playing by the rules, like you said, it's a challenging thing, because you have sometimes, and I don't want to blow this out of proportion, but sometimes you have like people asking for special favors, like I'm a Muslim taxi driver and I don't want to be alone with a woman. I'm a Muslim taxi driver and I'm not
That's the
going to take you to pick up alcohol. I'm a Muslim taxi driver and I'm not about to take you to that hotel with this. I mean, how far can you go? Like it's the freedom of choice if they want to, do all that stuff. You're not the religious police in the
yeah,
country,
yeah, yeah.
but you may as a Muslim, you may feel like you are partaking in something sinful yourself, right?
Mm.
So that's where they're coming from. So it's a challenge, because, or like the gay, we will not sell cakes to people who are, homosexual.
Yeah.
So these are like kind of like tricky examples of.
Those are tricky examples, and I think we need to have a sensible way of drawing the line. Where what behaviors are acceptable. Now, if somebody says that, oh, I need to pray 5 times a day, and I'm an air traffic controller, but I need to be gone for these 5 times a day. I don't know if that should be a concession that's available to anyone at all for any reason. That sort
Yeah.
of concession. And if it's not available to air traffic controllers, should it be available to someone who works in an office who has a desk-based job?
Hmm.
Possibly, but it shouldn't be taken as an automatic right that there's accommodation that needs to happen because it's faith and because that must always be accommodated because it's more wholesome. That needs to change.
Yeah, I found for the most part, like the praying 5 times a day, I was able to make it work for me
Mhm.
in the office environment. Like I just took a break from time to time, especially if you're like, like an IT professional, or you're a little
Yeah,
bit like white collar. It's not much of a challenge, because you can just take a break. But I
yeah.
think the more challenging situations are, like, for example, like dress code. Like, what if you're working in a restaurant that has a very specific dress code, and you're like, well, I wear hijab, or I can't shake hands, and then it becomes challenging because, you know, let's say you know you need to shake hands as part of the job. You take the job, and then you're like, I can't shake hands. Like, this is my religious right. It's like, well, now what do we do with you?
Those are the things I struggle with. I mean, no one put a gun to your head and said you must do this job. You know, there's everyone has it's you have a choice to not do that job. So I think those are the sort of accommodations that I don't have much support for. If someone wants to pray at work and, you know, they can work it out, people take smoking breaks. It's actually no different in that sense.
Yeah.
I see that brings me. I said smoking break, and that brings me to how I think religion should be treated in public life or in sort of common spaces. It should be treated exactly like smoking.
Okay.
Like, go. It should be treated exactly like smoking in the sense that go do it outside quietly for 5 minutes. You know, with like-minded people. Don't do it in front of children. Right? Don't be surprised if people keep reminding you how bad it is for you. Expect to be heavily taxed, but do it. Do it as much as you like.
Yeah.
So if that's my take on
someone's
religion
asking,
public life.
sorry, maybe
Yeah.
I better clarify this. Do you also have a problem with Sikh policemen who wear turbans or Sikh chiefs with long beards?
You know,
Yeah,
sorry,
you
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Yeah.
You go first.
I will put my hand up and admit that I have a bit of a double standard there. And by the way, beards on policemen, I think it's perfectly legal in the UK. They do have some guidelines. It doesn't have to be for religious reasons. I see a lot of cops with beards. So I think it's just a British thing. But I don't think beards should be regulated in terms of for obvious reasons. By the way, I never had a beard when I had any sort of faith or belief left.
Oh,
This
okay.
is a fairly recent phenomenon, FYI. But Sikhs and turbans as opposed to helmets. I don't think wearing turbans makes any sense whatsoever, and I think it's quite cruel. It's quite a cruel aspect of faith and especially in India where it gets really hot. I think it's really cruel that you can't cut your hair.
Yeah.
But I have a soft spot for Sikhs, and I've grown up, around so many Sikhs and had some really good friends. I like their spirit of service, and I don't actually know that much about the faith. I will admit that I do have a bit of a double standard. If I was consistent, I should be saying that accommodation should not be made for turbans. But then the places where you have these sort of accommodations made are usually in the armed forces. And coming from India, I would say that if you have an army and you have Sikhs in your country, you want your Sikhs to be in the army because they make fantastic soldiers. So I mean, I'm going to admit I have a bit of a double standard and I haven't really resolved that. But having said that, Sikhism or rather Sikh communities, there are many regressive practices that happen within Sikh communities. Some of the sort of insularity that I mentioned, that does apply to some extent to Sikh communities in the UK as well. The sort of honor-based violence and forced marriages or arranged marriages with a lot of pressure and coercion. Those sort of things do happen within the Sikh community as well. So I would rather fight those things, and it should be okay to say that's not on. Turbans, okay, maybe we can work around turbans and things like that when it comes. Sartorial things, I'm sure, are easier to accommodate. But certain things are just not on. So, forcing someone to get married, violence against women for whatever reason, I think we should be able to say that's not on. No one should be afraid of looking racist for making those sort of suggestions. And that does happen a bit in this country as well. There's so much colonial guilt that calling any sort of minorities to account for anything whatsoever, people are terrified of looking racist. And what happens then is the only people calling it out are actual racists, which is also not productive. So
that's funny. I just want to add to that as a secular person, I will fight for your right. So just want to clarify, everyone has a right to practice a religion, to wear a turban, whatever. We're not talking about, people just living their lives. What we're talking about is cases where there's a conflict between your demands of your job, or there's a situation in civil life where there's a conflict between, following your religion and the demands of, like, let's say, a particular job. For example, like we gave the example of Muslim taxi drivers not wanting to pick up alcohol or something like that. Now that's a challenge. Now, if a taxi driver just wants to put Quran in the car, he wants to have a beard, he wants to wear a topi, he wants to wear a thobe, he wants to say, takbir, takbir, la ilaha illallah, whatever. Like, I will, as an atheist, I will defend your right to do that. I will defend your right to wear your turban, to wear your hijab, to pray 5 times a day. No one should discriminate. Nobody should not hire you just because you have a hijab on your head.
Absolutely.
No one should
Absolutely.
fire you because you want to pray, as long as it's not getting in the way of your job and it's not an excuse, right? Like I have a problem with that. I have a problem with people being denied the civil liberties, because for me, like, I was a Muslim who grew up in Canada, and I had every right to do these things. And because of that, I love Canada. And I appreciate the fact that even as a Muslim, I had every right to pray, to fast. And of course, like, I was doing my job. I was a successful software developer. My boss loved me. And so they were okay with me taking time out to do these things because I was productive. I was not like, okay, I gotta go. I'll be back in 30 minutes. Come back in 30 minutes. And it's like, you said you were gonna be back in 30 minutes. Come back in an hour. Yeah, I was praying. What? Takes you 1 hour? Yeah, and actually I'm like smoking or something, right? So that's not what we're not talking about that. We're talking about people that are taking advantage, people that are going to the extreme and using the laws of the government to take advantage and to so that's the situation we're talking about. We're not talking about just
Absolutely,
general.
absolutely. Yeah, I think absolutely agree 100% with everything you said. And no, I think that's something that people do understand in this country. And there's people. The NHS, for example, is full of people from absolutely everywhere.
Sorry, what is that?
And
NHS?
the NHS, the National Health Service,
Okay.
our healthcare, the socialized healthcare system, and I'm using that as an example, and I mean, people understand that there's people from everywhere. There's lots of hijabis who work in there, lots of believing Muslim men with long beards and with their topi and everything. But people are working really hard, and nobody questions that. So, and I think that is the kind of society I want, that people should be able to have freedom of conscience and belief. I may argue with them about their belief and try to say, well, this makes no sense, but people should have that. That cannot be legislated. That cannot be legislated downwards and legislated from the top, I mean. But the point I was making was about certain practice, that we shouldn't go as far as accepting certain practices, which to any person of conscience in this century should be able to say, well, marrying underage girls should not be something we need to accept. FGM is something we don't need to accept. Now, does that come from religion or culture? We can have that sort of discussion. But just because there's a chance that it might be seen as an attack on faith, or we should not be having that discussion, that's where I come and draw the line. Burqa and niqab and stuff like that. Those are interesting debates to have, and there's pros and cons. But there are some things, I think, which we can agree is just completely non-negotiable. But that discussion becomes easier to have when we can accept a society where there are many people who leave faith behind. So they're not driven by faith, and that's okay. So, it shouldn't be that, oh no, these people are not really Muslim, we shouldn't be listening to them. I'm talking about people like yourself and me. We don't need to listen to these guys because they aren't really motivated. They don't know what they're talking about because they're not coming from a faith perspective. I think it needs to be much more normalized that it is okay for anyone, Muslim or whoever, to be able to take a pure human values-based humanist perspective of things and say, well, these are things that we cannot abide. And it doesn't matter what religion says, because these are human values which we should be able to take for granted.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we get to next
Yeah,
thing,
sure.
someone's asking,
Sure.
do you ever run into Dawah guys in London?
Surprisingly, no one's actually gone from me, and I don't know what it is. I used to. Maybe I just give off this vibe. I actually get more Jehovah's Witnesses who see me
Okay.
as a potential recruit. Maybe it's where I live now. There's a lot of Jehovah's Witness activity. I just politely say no and move on.
Yeah.
But I do see Dawa people. Maybe I also walk the other way. But somehow, especially since the beard, people maybe they think that I'm already in the might be preaching to
He's
the
one of
choir.
us already, right?
Here's one of us, mashallah. So, there's no need to go there. I get a lot of that as a child, actually, in India. When I was one of the naughty Muslims who wasn't praying, and the Tablighi Jamaat guys used to love coming for me. And when I say coming for me, it's all very friendly. And
Yeah.
as a guy, I remember I was home alone when I was about 11 or 12, and someone knocked on the door, and he came and he said, "Can I talk to you, brother?" He said, I've returned from Australia to be an investment banker. Can I ask you some questions? And he asked me, "Do you think about death?" I said, "No, I don't think about death." And he said, "Why don't you think about death?" I said, "Because I'm 12. I don't think." So I used to get a lot of that in India for some reason. I don't seem to get that. I think also, I think possibly, I may be wrong. I think the Dawa crowd tries to work more in white areas. They're looking for more of the mainstream British population, and they tend to leave um, brown people alone. I think that would be my guess.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe I just live in this North London liberal bubble where that is
Yeah.
one thing I really like about North London, that even the Muslims, even the really believing Muslims, seem to get it, and everybody just figures it out. Where I live, there's huge Turkish community, huge Somali community, huge Orthodox Jewish community. There's people from everywhere, and it's all people just figured it out, and that doesn't get in the way. And that's the kind of society. I mean, that I do like about being in the UK. That more often than not, it works out. It works out. People figured it out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good, and that's how it should be, and I hope
Yeah.
that that continues the same way. Now, tell me something.
Hmm.
What do you think about the importance of humor?
Importance of humor
Yeah,
in what sense? In terms of faith
yeah, yeah.
and
In
these
terms of
discussions.
like, yeah, in terms of like being able to take a joke. You know, just sometimes we make jokes about religious topics, and some people get
Yep.
offended. It's
Yep.
like, you know, thou shall not offend me, thou shall not insult me, thou shall not criticize my holy book. Like, it's a
Yeah.
sick, you know, like it's sacred to me. And what do you think about all that? Like,
I think humor is it's a very important part of my life, and I think it's extremely useful in these things, if you ask me, especially when it comes to dogma and taboos about discussing things where you just can't say that. Why not? What happens when I do say that? So on the one hand, it can keep things light and diffuse the tension, and I enjoy that. You've seen some of the sparring I do online. Um, I think it's very useful because it causes a jolt to the really fervent believer of anything. I don't necessarily mean just Muslims.
yeah,
It applies to the alt-right in the US, or the right wing, the Hindutva crowd in India, for example. um, it sort of shakes people. And why is this so easy to mock? Why do these people keep making jokes about this all the time? And maybe I need to dig down and find some more ammunition for myself to defend my position. And I think that's when a lot of enlightenment can potentially take place, when people examine their own positions and realize, actually, there isn't anything to defend here. There's a chance I might be the one who's gone the wrong end of the stick here.
yeah,
So I find humor incredibly important like that. And sometimes you can make it's, of course, there's a certain degree of restraint and finesse that one should be able to apply to that. You don't whack people on the head and say, pedophile, pedophile, Muhammad was a pedophile, you guys. So, but that's unproductive,
Yeah.
if you ask me. But little bit of satire, a little bit of mockery. I think that goes a long way. I mean, I'm in the right place for it. This is the UK. I mean, where, and England in particular, no one ever says something straight on. Everyone's sort of taking the piss, if you're familiar with that phrase. Always, always joking around about everything, as everything's a bit of banter. And I think that's great. I think that's a great way to discuss religion, great way to discuss faith. But nobody should have special rights. That's where Muslims manage to keep a bit of a cocoon around themselves, and I'd like to see that change. Because
Yeah.
Christians, for example, there are Christian fundamentalists in this country in a very English sort of way. They're more laid back than fundamentalists elsewhere, but they can take a joke.
Yeah.
They can take a joke. No one's out. No one's out in the streets complaining about it. They may get upset, they may not like it, but they don't care. It doesn't shake the foundation of their belief, their faith. And likewise, people of so many other faiths. I'd really like Muslims to be able to do that.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah,
I feel like things are changing a bit, and
yeah.
like people are becoming more tolerant in general across the board. I find even in Muslim communities, like when I first started this, it was like I got so many death threats, but I don't know. I don't get them anymore. Maybe
That's great.
like one here and there. It doesn't mean that like everything's fine now.
Do you miss them?
No, no, that's
Like,
just
no one
my
loves me. No one wants to kill me anymore.
it could be my particular approach as well.
Mm,
I'm trying my best not to piss off people. But that comes to another kind of interesting topic, which is breaking taboos. Like,
mhm.
mocking is one of the taboos, like mocking religion. And I I I I try to be this polite person that's respectful and doesn't make fun, but sometimes I do make fun, right? And people get angry, right? And I try not to do it, but I always do it. I always end up doing it somehow. Like the funniest example, I don't know if I should mention his name. Anyways, there's a guy that like he's he's some anti-terrorism Muslim guy. He
Mm.
works with the government in Canada to, you know, de you know, de-radicalize Muslims and stuff. And this guy used to be in the army and this and that. Okay. This is so embarrassing. I made a post where I said, when I when I used to lose my keys, I used to say Bismillah and I would find them. Now I just say Yabba Dabba Doo and it works just as well. The guy got so mad at me, he blocked
Oh,
me.
really?
He's like
Oh, really?
anti-jihadi. He has pictures with guns on his like Facebook.
Oh, wow.
And
I thought,
he got mad over that. I was like,
I think,
what
I say that, on the internet, I could say something like, I love my mother, or, I feel hot when the sun's out, and then someone's likely to get offended by that. So I think you just can't. But I think there's this view that everything about Islam should be sacrosanct and should not be mocked, or else off with your head, because you're not Muslim anymore if you say that, and then off with your head. And I think what that ends up doing is it makes sure people don't have to challenge their own positions. And I think the people who react that way, I think what they're actually saying is, you're making me think about my beliefs, which I can't really explain, which at the back of my mind and in my heart of hearts, I know are without foundation, or without basis. And people don't want to face up to that. And that's the reaction. That's why people react that way. Unfortunately, it's sort of coded into the faith to say that anyone who does this is so and so
Yeah.
and needs to be gotten rid of. So that's why I want that to change. But yes, I think it's becoming just so there's just so much now that you can't really play whack-a-mole with everybody who offends you, because it's just going to happen. It's the better way to do that is make your positions more unassailable, and if they're not, then question your positions if you
I
can't
just
defend them. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I just want to say thank you to Jon Snow for 2,000 rubles. I guess that's a Russian currency.
Wow, nice.
He said, "Hey, how are you? It might be out of topic, guys, but why Quran seems so crumpled, especially in the end, as Muhammad ran out of booty and ink." I think he's making a joke. I'm not
Or
sure.
does he mean the verses just get, not the verses, the chapters just get shorter and shorter?
They do
I don't
get,
know. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, they do get shorter and shorter, and I do have a video on the Sanaa manuscript, which talks about how they reuse the palimpsest, the paper or the parchment was reused multiple times. Instead of burning it like Uthman wanted, they used it multiple times, and then we managed, using ultraviolet light, we managed to see the old version. But thank you for your donation, John. Yeah, so I, isn't that part of it too? Like just kind of like pissing off people so they stop getting mad when you piss them off. I'm not saying piss them
Yeah.
off like in this, like like you said, like Muhammad being a pedophile is a good example of like
That's just pissing people
it's
off
just
for the sake
it's
of it. It's not productive.
yeah,
Yeah,
like there is,
yeah,
I think there is a legitimate point that people are
absolutely.
making too, but a lot of times it comes across as I'm better than you, right? It's
Yeah,
not like you're not trying to convince that person anymore. You're
no,
just like basically fuck you, basically, right? Like that's
yeah,
what
yeah,
you're
yeah.
saying to you, like, oh, you dumb Muslim, kind of like, and it comes from multiple places. It comes from the Hindu far right, the just the general far right in general, where there's kind of like
Yeah.
yeah,
And also, it's also lazy. I feel that for humor or satire to be useful, it has to have a little bit of knowledge behind it. So,
yeah,
it has to be, if you look at any good satire, if you look at what Jon Stewart did for so many years, and it was so much was absurd, but it was rooted in fact. It was based on a bedrock of things that have actually happened or things that people actually believe. So, it's that's where I think that's when it gets through much more. One of my favorite things, rather than banging on about being a pedophile, is buraq, which I call uberaq, the flying. For those who don't know, the flying winged donkey or horse-like creature that Muhammad is supposed to have ascended to the seventh heaven, and because it opens up, and if you make it more specific, and then people get, oh no, it wasn't a donkey, it was actually a winged horse, and then we can say, well, yeah, that's much better. So when you come from it from a place of a bit of understanding, then you can get into these sort of more interesting discussions where people start debating, well, was it a seventh heaven, was it the ninth heaven, start getting into the levels of absurdity. And I think that's much more useful than just bashing people over the head with stuff that you're like you said, you're just doing to say I'm better than you.
yeah, yeah. The buraq one is another one which I tend to avoid in most
Yeah,
cases because I feel like it's overused.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But and
I
also
just contrasting. Yeah,
yeah, also I do feel like with the buraq, in the context of like Allah sending like floods and like splitting the seas, and it's no different in terms of like class, like it's just another miracle, right, that
yeah,
they believe their
yeah,
God did, right? But what I do think is interesting about the buraq is like how to make sense of that with like how to make that coherent with science. So like where did he go exactly? Like, you know what I mean?
yeah,
Like is he in space? Like he went up to the seven heavens outside of the universe, but that is actually more
yeah,
interesting because of the previous ancient kind of understanding of the seven heavens. was like Jupiter, Mars, Pluto, Saturn, not Pluto, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, Saturn, the moon and sun and earth. So there was the seven spheres, and Plato had the same idea. And so when he's going from heaven to heaven, like, did they actually believe those planets were actual like places where people lived? Like that
Yeah.
that to me actually is more coherent than saying that he
Yeah.
went
Yeah.
in space. Like, but then you get into the question of like, what about the shooting stars in the Quran that are like shooting angels? That's another interesting point. Like, what are they? Is it like devils? Sorry, shooting angels, shooting devils. Are the
Yes.
devils in space? like
Yeah. Where
we
are
see.
they?
Yeah, like, and so now we get into like a problem where it's not really adding up. The worldview that we have today, it doesn't kind
Yeah.
of cohere nicely with
Yeah.
the Islamic story, right?
Yeah. I mean, I guess, and then ultimately that can lead on to the point that when you say that science, there's no contradiction between science and the Quran, for example. But look at the level of detail that science gets into. Look at the rigor that science put itself through to describe something. It doesn't loosely make something and say, well, let's see if somebody says this better and then we'll try to retrofit it later. That's just not how science works. And I think, yeah, we need to be much. If this is the best work, if this is the deity's best work, then I'm disappointed. I would expect better from a book meant for all time, and that's where I would like to take this discussion to, that the divinity. Are we sure this is divine? Are we satisfied if this is divine? If this is a divine work uh, for all of humanity, for all of time, which everyone everywhere through the ages will understand and it will be relevant to, then are we satisfied with what it is? We always have to explain things away. So that's then a more interesting discussion to have. And if we can make that a sensible discussion, I think that will resolve a lot of things.
Yeah, it's a question of low standards for Allah.
Yeah.
Like, how do we excuse and escape like issue after issue after
Yeah.
issue,
Yeah.
right? But maybe you're not understanding it correctly. Like, you don't know
The
Arabic,
context.
you
The
don't know Arabic,
context.
and you don't know
Yes. I don't know.
Arabic.
I'm not a PhD in Arabic. I mean, that's a
It's like you have to
in
be.
classical Arabic. Yeah.
Yeah, like, what was the point of sending a book in classical Arabic if
Yeah.
that was limited, or if that was a
Yeah.
limiting factor? Why would you send a limiting? Why would you use a
Yeah.
medium with a limiting factor like that, right?
And why limit yourself? Why do you say, okay, now I won't do this again? Issue an
Yeah,
update. Why is there
yeah,
no upgrade available? You pay
because
a bit more, you get the upgrade early, and I don't know, there could be something. Use WhatsApp. There's so many tools available.
the
So
final because the final one is perfect. It already doesn't need any updates, you see? Unlike science, which always changes. Like, what do you say about that? Science is always
yeah,
changing.
I
Today the
know. It
earth is
doesn't know
round,
anything.
tomorrow the earth is flat. How do you know tomorrow's earth's not going to be flat? Like, how you don't know that?
That's a fair point, actually.
Um,
But no, that's not exactly. So I think that sort of thing about divinity is this divine and absolute. If we are able to say, oh, this may not, it has some things which people can take solace from, people can learn from. It's an interesting work of literature, etc., etc. There's some guidance for those who seek it. Is it perfect? Is it necessarily divine? If we're able to say maybe not, if we're able to say that, just by my saying this now, there must be people who are upset by the very notion that I'm even making the suggestion that it's not divine, it's not necessarily divine. But unless we can say that, I think we'll be stuck. And if once we become able to say that without fear, without repercussions, then maybe we can have a bit more sensible discussions going on. Or maybe there's
yeah,
some things we can discard because we don't have to then explain, is it beating with a toothbrush or whatever. So we don't have to get into that stupid thing and say, okay, this was not divine. Get it out.
yeah.
Just get it out. End of discussion. So we should be able to say that.
Just
Okay.
got
Yeah.
another donation. Just want to say
Yeah.
thank you as well to PCMO, saying this is a thank you donation to Abdullah Samir. How do we get religious people to take climate change seriously? They might think it's a good thing, the end times.
That's a very good question. That's a very good
It's
question.
honestly astounding for me to meet people that don't hate climate change, like that don't believe in climate change, or that think that like climate change is not, it's like we have nothing to do with climate change. It's just nope. We've just like, like made 80% of we've made 80% of the species extinct, including, in Australia, all of the large marsupials, and yet, a lot of the fish are now gone forever. The coral reefs are all dead, but human beings have nothing to do with this. Some people want to think this. It's astounding. It's to me, it's mind-boggling that anyone can believe such a thing. Like, yes, of course, there's going to be climate change is going to be out of control to some level, but there's so much we're doing wrong that we can do better, right?
I agree. To that question in particular, though, I'm not sure myself what influence religion directly has on people denying climate change. I'd like to believe that there are believers who are the religious right in America is a very special case, and that's where it's most dangerous, I think. But I'd like to believe that even believers and religious people see the effects of climate change and fight it, and they don't see it against the religion. They don't think this is God's plan, and oh, yeah, oh, Judgment Day is another day closer. I'd like to think that's not the case, but I think the bigger issue here is believing things without evidence or believing things despite evidence to the
Mm,
contrary. And now that's where I start to have problems with religion, because that's where it comes from. Or it may not come from there, it might be a human tendency, but religion upholds that. Religion says it's okay to really strongly believe stuff despite evidence, not just without having evidence, but despite evidence. You can hold on to beliefs. And that's where I think I would like to, that's why I like to push for things where we're looking at evidence, empirical observations. Because people say, oh, you guys always, oh, you science people always bang on about evidence. Not everything has evidence, not everything can be explained away. Maybe, but when you have two opposing things, I don't know how to choose between the two of them other than just strength of belief. Otherwise, it just becomes about how strongly I feel about this, and whose strength of feeling overrides somebody else's strength of feeling. How does that work?
mhm,
Evidence just gives us a basis that we can use across the board. So I think that's where we can say that we may not have to look into the evidence about God. Let's leave that out for a
mhm,
second. Let's
mhm.
just agree when it comes to the material world that we see around ourselves. Let's at least accept that that's where we do look at evidence. And that's maybe we can have a sensible discussion about climate change there.
Yeah, I
Anyway,
think
I don't know that answers the
you
question.
made a very good point about taking things without evidence, the importance of skepticism.
Yeah,
I do believe that there are they're probably a minority, but there are crazy people who do want the day of judgment or the end
I'm
of
sure.
times or the Armageddon to come. Unfortunately, a lot of these religious right are happy that there's instability in the Middle East,
Yeah.
and you have a bit of like, the same kind of far right in Islam, like ISIS, that they also want
Mhm.
the day of judgment to come. But not they want Dajjal to come, and like they're trying to implement the actual prophecies of Muhammad, where they said, from this place, Khorasan in Syria, this will happen, and so they're trying to do that. Like they're trying to be there and wait for and obviously,
Bring on the end of times,
but
basically.
obviously it didn't
Yeah.
happen. Like these
Yeah.
guys were waiting for the Mahdi to come. No Mahdi, ain't no Mahdi coming, and you know what? Like you don't know whether to feel sorry for these people or like laugh at them, because like day of judgment is not coming. Like it's I always have mixed feelings about stuff like that. Like I don't know how to I don't know how to react when people.
I don't feel sorry for the ones who did inflict death and suffering on other people. I do feel a bit sorry for those who went there expecting some sort of utopia.
Yeah.
And then they realize, oh no, this is really hard. There's no Wi-Fi. There's no cappuccinos. And uh, I need to go back. And I said, sorry, dude. I mean, should have thought about that earlier. How- How's the Mehdi stuff working out for you? But as a consequence, because of all this ISIS stuff, as a sort of random aside, I started looking into this eschatology about the end of times and the Mahdi and the Dajjal and in a second coming of Jesus, which is a surprisingly big part of Islamic eschatology. I hadn't realized that, maybe according to certain traditions.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I didn't have to take it seriously. I don't have to understand. I can just look at it as literature, as mythology, and say, that's interesting that people believe this. So
Hmm.
I think that's one thing you can do if you're not tied into the faith, because if you have to then resolve this, even though there's no evidence or anything, but you're supposed to believe it, and like, well, this makes no sense to me. Now I need
Yeah.
to sit and understand this. Well, I don't need to understand this because I don't think there's anything there anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you can enjoy it much more
I
if
was gonna
enjoy is the right word.
say, just to add one more thing, that there is unfortunately
Yeah.
vested interests that do try to sabotage the world. Like, let's say climate change is an example.
Yeah.
Like, a good example that comes to mind is the whole thing about adding lead to gasoline, and how
Mm,
there were companies that were actually spending a lot of money to buy out scientists to like continue to shout
mm,
and say that lead is nothing to do. It's harmless in the environment. It does nothing wrong. Yet, there was one scientist. He's actually a hero. I forgot his name. I have to look him up. And he actually fought his like whole life to prove that the lead in the environment um, is not natural, right?
mm,
And so what he did was he went all the way to the Arctic, and he dug into the old ice, because the ice goes in layers, right? So you can
mm,
actually
mm,
dig
mm.
down, and you can get, if you go deep enough, you can actually look at the environment. It's like captured in time from like
Right, right,
100
right.
years ago, 200 years ago. And so he was able to prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that this lead is not natural. It's coming from the gasoline, and it's poisoning people and making them more violent, and like causing health issues. And so they eventually, lead was banned from gasoline. But that's kind of like a sad example in the history of science. In
Yep.
a way, it kind of like it solved itself, and science was victorious at the end of the day. But for
Yeah.
many years, like, people were poisoned by
and that
bad
would be
science,
a
right?
and that would be a legitimate criticism that people can raise, that, well, science doesn't always have the answers. Science has vested interest. But to that, and therefore people can say, well, so maybe evidence is not the best way to look at things. But to that I say, we do know the difference between good science and bad science. That was bad science, which people were able to put out there and for a number of years managed to fool a lot of people. But eventually, better science triumphed. And we know
Yes.
what makes good science.
Yeah.
We don't know that about belief. We don't know how to do that with belief. We don't know what is good belief versus
good
bad
belief
belief.
good belief is Islam. Bad belief is Christianity, Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, everything else.
Which Islam though? Sunni Islam, obviously.
uh hmm.
Do you see?
Yeah, it's funny
So
how that comes up. It comes up with me a lot.
yeah,
um you were Salafi, you don't know anything
yeah,
about Islam. You
yeah.
were
There are no truth.
Salafi, you don't know anything about Islam. Like, what, like, which one do you want? Like, it's like,
there are no true Muslims.
there's
There
no
are no
true
true Muslims.
it's no
There are more
true.
unicorns on earth than true Muslims, if you ask me.
Muhammad
Anyone who
was
does,
Muhammad
the
was a true
last one.
Muslim, but we don't actually
Yeah,
know exactly like weak hadith
yeah,
and strong hadith. So he's a
yeah, yeah,
mythical
yeah.
true Muslim, right? And then the
Yeah.
companions, again, how much
There
of
are
what they
as
did.
many.
Hmm?
There are as many true Muslims as there are authentic hadiths or
Yeah.
hadiths, because the moment you challenge the hadith, oh no, that's a weak one, oh no, that one. So do you know what I mean? If you have a discussion about hadith with anyone, it becomes the moment something becomes uncomfortable, then people find a way to say that, oh no, that one I'm not sure about. Maybe that one's a bit weak, that one's a bit motivated. I wish we could do the same with the Quran and say, well, I'm not sure about that particular verse, Maybe we should look at that. Well, I wish we could get there. Anyway, I'm only joking
No, it's
about
no. What do you mean
yeah.
joking? That's it's
No, I mean,
funny.
I'm only joking about the hadith bit. I do genuinely wish we could do this with the Quran. So I'm not
And
joking about that. Yeah.
and I won't
Mm.
mention his name, but there's a mutual friend of some guy we know
Mhm.
that what I found with him, he's a reformed Muslim or something. I don't know, it's like New Age Muslim. And what he used to do is anytime there was something in the hadith that he didn't like, he'd be like, nah, I don't
Yeah,
need that hadith, right?
that's the
But
kind of thing I meant. Yeah.
but the problem is it was in the Quran. He was like trapped. He's like,
Yeah.
I have to accept this. Yeah. This is good. This is good for humanity that you have to do this, right? An example was like homosexuality being haram. Of course, you can try to weasel your way out of that, and some progressive Muslims have tried to say that
Yeah.
homosexuality is not forbidden in the Quran, and I have to admit, lesbianism is not forbidden in the Quran. It's not
Yep.
just like gay sex, right? But
Yeah.
still, like they try to weasel out of that, but still, you can't really get out of that. Like it's kind of
Yeah.
clear in the Quran that gay sex is not allowed. So what I find is with some Muslims, they're kind of like, I had one one friend who is a practicing Orthodox Sunni Muslim, not this funny guy that picked and choose except for the Quran. But he was like, we talked about magic, and I said, well, magic doesn't make sense. It's like there's no such thing as magic. How is it in the 21st century we're still debating is magic real? And he's like, yeah, that kind of makes sense. That magic there's no such thing as magic. I'm like, it says in the Quran that magic is real. He's like, oh, wait. Actually,
It
magic
must
is
be this.
real. Must be real. I was like, you were agreeing with me. What happened?
So actually, this actually reminds me of this was ultimately this pattern of thinking is what led me to finally leave faith behind completely,
Mhm.
which is if you speak to believers of most faiths, I think quite often you come up against the argument that because I am XYZ, because I am Muslim, I believe this. And when I heard this, or when I said these sort of statements aloud to myself, I said, well, what's true has got to be true.
Mm.
What's true should not care what you are. It shouldn't matter. And this is my problem with identity politics as well. We will say, as a left-wing person, I believe. Well, it shouldn't matter where you put yourself on the spectrum. What is this true or not? Things are either true or they aren't, and it shouldn't matter what sort of label you apply to yourself. And once people can have that sort of honest discussion with themselves, that, or would I believe this if I wasn't a Muslim? Would I believe this if I wasn't a Christian or a Sikh or a Hindu or whatever? Would it suddenly stop being true? Then chances are it's not true. You can't
It's
have Schrodinger statements for everything.
it's a good point, and it's difficult for us humans to kind of look outside of an immediate perspective, and we do that a lot. Like we have different like expectations for others and for ourselves. So like that's why I find street epistemology or the
Mhm.
Socratic method is very helpful, because you ask questions to the person you're
Mm.
speaking to, and you say, okay, what do you believe? I believe in the Quran is the word of God, because I'm Muslim. Okay, let's say I'm Hindu and I came to you and I said, somebody's telling me that Christianity is true and somebody's telling me Islam is true. How do you know which one's true? And then they have to think about it. Like, oh, the Quran is true because it's from Allah. Huh? Like, okay, wait, that didn't work. Let's try again. So, and a good mutual friend, Abdullah Gondal, I love his rhetorical posts he makes, where
Yeah,
he'll say like the great god Zenu, this and that, and he'll make up this like really contrived.
elaborate. Yeah,
Yeah, and then at the end of it, you're like, oh, by the way, just replace Zenu with Allah, and now suddenly this is Islam. But before that, you're like, oh my God, this is such a
this
weird
is
cult.
nonsense. Yeah.
I can't believe this. This is horrible. Like, who believes this nonsense, right? And it reminds me of when I was in, I don't know if it was anthropology class in university, where they described like some of the, you might have seen this before, where they describe some
Mhm.
like ritual that's like very common, like brushing your teeth, but they put it like
Mhm.
from an outsider's perspective. the chimp goes and takes a toothpick, and like they describe it in a way that you from an outsider's perspective, and you're like, whoa, that's some weird stuff they're doing there. What are they doing? And then they're like, oh, he's brushing his teeth. Oh, I thought he was talking about something else, but it's like we don't think about it.
Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
the myth of Ibrahim and his son. And that was also an interesting point, by the way. It was only when I was in my mid-20s did I realize that it was supposed to be Isaac or Ishaq, as per the Jewish and Christian tradition, and Ismail or Ishmael as per the Muslim tradition that he sacrificed. It's very interesting. How did that happen? I don't know. But
Mm.
if that whole story was framed as sort of Greek mythology or Hindu mythology, and then placed before Muslims, how would they react? Or before Jews or Christians, how would they react? And then suddenly it becomes okay. And if we said somebody did that in today's world, there have been cases where people have been convicted, sent to jail, had some serious mental health assessment because they said God asked me to kill my son, or
Oh
God asked me to kill
yes.
my child. There was a case that happened recently. I think it's somewhere in the U.S. A woman killed her child,
Yeah,
and
5 kids or
and
something there in the bathtub.
yes, and
Yeah.
yeah, something very gruesome and really distressing. And no one questions that this person is a risk to society, possibly to themselves. They need to be put away either in a mental health facility, or they need to be at the very, what we call it, sectioning in the UK. I don't know what it's called elsewhere, where they're sort of kept away from everyone for starters, and then you see whether there's criminal proceedings or mental health treatment, etc. Nobody questions that. But if
Yeah.
this happened, I don't know, X thousand years ago, and then it's okay. We need to be able to
Yeah.
say it's not okay.
Yeah. It's a good point.
Yeah,
Like why
yeah. What's the
um
statute of limitations on crazy stuff? As in, like, after how many hundreds of years does it become okay and not completely bonkers?
yeah, like interesting thing is most likely, at least with Abraham, the story
Yeah,
was probably made up
of course.
because
Yeah,
most historical scholars don't believe that Abraham actually existed, that he was made up, but euhamized. I don't know how to say that word. Anyways, but the question is, like, when we look at what Muhammad claimed, when we look at what he how he described his revelations, and again Abdullah Gondal did a very good job kind of
that was
summarizing
yeah,
this. It's like you said, like we have a perfectly good explanation for this, which
yeah,
is like temporal lobe epilepsy. Dr. Ramachandran has done a lot of research on this, and as time goes by, we're discovering more and more about the brain, which is such an amazing thing. But like it's also weird in some ways, like the way can behave and it malfunctions, like phantom limb syndrome, or like when you split brain patients, how they have like different personalities for the left hand and right hand. So it actually can behave very strangely, and science is kind of helping us slowly get to the bottom of how these things work. But yeah, we do have like actually very good explanations for how Muhammad may have got revelation. And people may ask, how is it that he convinced 1.8 billion people? I had someone ask me that, and he didn't convince 1.8 billion people. He
yeah,
set up a system that that didn't allow attrition. So if you left it, you could be killed.
yeah,
And two, it was a viral system that like it spreads itself, right? Like you
yeah,
you have to do dawah and you get this
yeah,
reward. And so the system was made to grow, and jihad, of course, is a big part of
yeah,
Islamic expansionism,
yeah,
Islamic
yeah,
imperialism. So
yeah,
that's why Islam is growing, and say
yeah.
Judaism never really grew to the same amount because it's
Because
not
they didn't
evangelical.
proselytize. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. Just I hate to do this because it kind of takes away from what we're doing. But somebody asked, do
Questions.
you know about the young boys waiting for you in heaven? Turns out Arabs were fond of young boys back then. The thing is, I've heard a lot of like I've heard people use this as an argument against Islam. Or sometimes even like progressive Muslims will say, well, yeah, women get young like boys in Jannah or something. But like as a Muslim, I never once heard those descriptions of the young
I
boys
haven't.
like serving you as like a sexual thing. Like I've never ever, as a Muslim, even once ever in 15 years, heard of that in a sexual manner, neither for women nor for men.
Yeah, me
Like,
neither.
it's, to be honest, to me, it feels like projection. I'm not a scholar of ancient Arabia that I'd be able to, even from like, it'd be interesting to look at the academics on this. But I'm saying,
Yeah,
as a believing Muslim, nobody believes this. Nobody
yeah.
believes there's any sort of homosexual sex in heaven. Like, not with little
Maybe,
boys, not with grown men.
yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's a very specific, it's specific to some particular region. I have no idea. I have never come across that myself.
Yeah.
So
Anyway, so that
I
was
don't
that
know.
question.
Yeah.
And sorry. So yeah, getting back to the main topic we were saying about. Did you want to add anything to what I asked?
No, it was some. I wanted to add actually something slightly different, which somebody asked me, and a friend of mine was an atheist, but a very well-read guy from a Christian background, Orthodox Christian background, but an atheist himself. He asked me, why is the Muslim heaven so sensual and so hedonistic? Why did Allah not make all that okay in this life? And when you're in heaven, then you can have more self-actualization thing, like hang out with Abraham and Moses and like really understand the nature of things, because then you have all the time in the world to discuss all that. That's it's a very fair question.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting.
Isn't that a higher plane of existence that should be associated with the higher plane of existence? Why is heaven described in such earthly terms with the shade of palm trees and
Yeah, and why is it so male dominated?
yeah,
Right? Like,
yeah,
that's a challenge for many Muslim women. How
yeah,
is it that men get all of these things, and what do women get? Right? Like what does
yeah.
a woman get in paradise?
And isn't there a hadith as well about Muhammad having said that I went to heaven and there weren't many women there, or I went to hell and most of the inhabitants were women? I think there's a
Yeah,
hadith to
there's a
that effect.
hadith in Sahih Bukhari or Muslim. It's a very strong. It's a strong hadith, considered a strong hadith, that
Yeah,
most of the inhabitants of hell are women.
are women.
Yeah, again,
So
like,
how do people reconcile this? As in,
as a Muslim, I reconcile this by saying, or by, I was taught that, like, this is like an encouragement for women not to be bad to their husbands, and also to, like, give in charity. I don't know. This doesn't sound very convincing, does it?
no. Why not? Why does that not apply to men? It's just
uh, I'm. I feel bad when I
context.
think about.
Context.
I feel bad. I feel bad when I think about, like, somebody asked me a question like that,
Uh-huh.
and I'm thinking, like, there's no good answer for that. Like, but like, I accepted it, and now
Yeah.
I'm like, it's embarrassing. Like, like, how did I believe this? Like, I had a friend message me that is like, oh my god, I can't believe how dumb I was. Like, stuff is so stupid. Like, how did I believe this? And I'm like, sometimes I feel that way too. Like, I don't have. There's no good way to justify why there would be more
I've
women in
I've
hell, right?
I've
Like,
I've thought I've tried to figure that out. That how think a lot about that. Why do people allow themselves perfectly sensible, reasonable, kind, gentle people? Why do they accept all this? And I think just the fear of the afterlife that gets drilled into you by Islam in particular, I think that can be a real, very powerful motivator. And it also makes you want to think, oh no, I really have a shot at that being better. And for that, now I need to believe all sorts of other things without evidence.
yeah,
And I think that can be a very powerful motivator that makes people look the other way on all kinds of things.
that's a good point. That's a good point. That the Islamic perspective is to, once you believe it's from God, then no matter what it tells you, you just accept it. Like, you just like,
Yeah,
well, whatever. Like, that's what God said. And the thing is, a lot of times it's actually women who are enforcing these, like,
yeah,
misogynistic, like, rules on other women. Like,
yeah,
hijab. A lot of times it's the moms that are, like,
yeah,
enforcing hijab on the daughters,
yeah,
right? So it's not
yep.
necessarily like people think it's all men doing these things. No, sometimes the women are actually doing it because they believe in it as well, and they think this is, like, better for them, like, going to paradise. So, everybody is being everybody. That's why I agree that religion is a mind virus. It gives you this. It poisons your thinking, and it spreads itself.
It
Further.
replicates. Yeah.
Yeah, it replicates itself, and then you're basically like making excuses for things that don't make any sense, right? It's just like how do most women end up in hell? Again, that makes no sense. Now, I'm really happy to say that even though the Sahih Hadith have almost like a dogmatic status in the minds of most Muslims, that's changing, and
Mm.
people are actually now like going back, because like honestly speaking, this was built up over 1400 years, meaning like the scholars over the hundreds of years have actually canonized these hadith and all this stuff, and it's become almost like infallible, like Bukhari now. But like, who made it infallible in the first place, right? Like, somebody needs to go back in the Muslim community and go back. I don't know if it's too late to find out now, because obviously there's been so many years of like allowing like false and weak hadith that it's
I think
difficult
also.
to put
Yeah.
the genie back in the bottle now.
No, I think one thing that influenced all this is that most people had never read any hadith, as far as I know, because they weren't really that accessible. Quran everybody might have in their house, but
Yeah.
who has volumes of hadith? When I started looking them up 20 years ago, it was the Council for Muslim Jewish Relations. It was the University of South Carolina, I think. They had a huge online collection of hadith, and I used to just sit and read the hadith. I was like, "Wow, there's some really crazy stuff here." But
Yeah.
most people have never done that. And most like your common or garden Muslim, sitting at home doesn't do that. But now you have Quranex.com, which I would like to mention to anyone with any sort of interest in the Quran or Hadith. You can go and look up Quranex.com. Everything's there, referenced, annotated. You can search by keyword, and it's all there. And then when people actually start reading stuff, then they might think, yeah, I'm not so sure about that one. Because
Mhm.
so much of Muslim practice, especially Sunni Muslim practice, obviously, is based on the Hadith. And
Yeah.
so many beliefs are based on that. And when people look at the kind of Hadith that are the basis for things that they believe and practice in their everyday life, then maybe they'll think, wow, maybe, yeah, no, I'm not sure about that. And this one I can reject. Quran, maybe I'll think about later, but stuff that's not in the Quran, maybe I just don't have to deal with it. I don't have to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we'll just finish up in the next 10-15 minutes, and
Oh, sure, yeah, yeah.
I want to add that
Mm,
that is true. And I do think another thing, I remembered my point. I was trying to remember my
mm,
point.
mhm,
Academics on Islam need to be popularized, because what I
mhm,
found is there's a wealth of information in the academics. When I say academics, I'm talking about like Orientalists, I'm talking about Muslim
mm,
academics who have studied this, not just like what the imams and the muftis and the maulanas and the
mm.
maulvis are taught. Maulvis are just reciting what they're told, and it's just like parrots. They'll just continue the chain of like nonsense. I'm talking about academics who care about the truth, were in Western, or even, I don't even know if the Muslim world even has that. Maybe Azhar, maybe, I don't know. But like Harvard and Yale, and like people, when they're exposed to these type of like analyses on Islam, like it's ground shaking. It's like it
Mm,
shakes your faith on, is the Quran really preserved? Like,
mm.
I was just taught the Quran was preserved, and my grandfather was taught that, and his grandfather. Everybody believes the Quran's preserved because I have a Quran in my house, and it's the same as the Quran down the street. Well, it must be preserved. No,
Yeah,
like there's problems in the narrative, and the academics, these quiet little guys and women and men are both going and like pulling apart the story from the
yeah,
original references and like putting it together. And what they're
yeah,
finding is, like, we've been fed a lot of half truths, a lot of lies. I do believe that Sunni Islam will fall apart if it's exposed to the light of scrutiny. So Shia Islam as well. What won't fall apart is like some esoteric Sufi kind of like version of Islam, that you're like, God is haqq, God is truth, truth is inside me, God is inside me, I'm inside God. Like, like those kawalis you listen to about wine You know, the
Yeah,
beauty of wine, and We Do Wids had a video about
yeah,
that too.
yeah. It's pretty funny.
So yeah,
Yeah.
that's I do
Yeah.
think that, yeah.
Yeah. By the way, I just noticed a question, if you don't mind. I know this
Yes,
is your
please.
chat, but I just wanted to answer that. There's Aditya who asked, what's the difference between Quran.com and QuranX.com? I think both are fantastic websites. I haven't really looked into who exactly runs them, which maybe I should. But Quran.com is specifically about the Quran and only the Quran. You can compare different translations, and these are all well-known translations. The books are available. If you go to any Islamic center or any Dawah person can give you the books, so you can match them to see whether they're authentic, authorized translations, English translations or not. QuranX.com includes most of the well-known collections of hadith as well. So both are really good resources. I find Quran.com easier to read and much more user-friendly, but QuranX.com is much more comprehensive.
Yeah, so I would add to that. I know a little bit more than about the
Mm,
background.
mm,
Quran.com is actually run by a few friends of mine,
mm.
and they also run Sunnah.com, which is an amazing resource. Sunnah.com, Sunnah.com, and Quran.com. The thing I really like about Quran X, which has now become my go-to, it's for tafsir. The
Oh yeah,
tafsir,
tafsir. So I forgot to mention tafsir. Yeah.
yeah, tafsir in English connected to each surah. This is beautiful because normally you have to go to some tafsir website and it's very difficult. Like it's very awkward to navigate.
Maybe you should
In
explain what tafsir is, as in
Tafsir
for
is
those who don't know.
exegesis, the scholars' writings on the Quran. Now, again, if you say, well, the tafsir says this, Mr. Muslim, the tafsir says this, and this is wrong, they'll say, no, the tafsir is not what the Quran says. It's someone's opinion. It's a man-made opinion. But you'd be like, but the tafsir, they studied this for their lifetime. The scholars of the language, they understand Arabic. They have like, they know this stuff and they spent their whole lives. No, tafsir is wrong.
Hashtag not true Muslim.
Yeah, not true Muslim again. But the tafsir is a useful resource because,
Yeah.
in general, these scholars were well respected by the community. The well respected, like scholars, they understood the language, and it shows you something very interesting. It
Yep.
shows you what the Muslim community at that time used to think about that verse. So,
Mm.
a good example is a master Arab talks about the sun setting in a milky spring, and he actually goes from like tafsir to tafsir in order of date. And you see how when the science catches up, boom, suddenly the sun is no longer going to muddy pool. It looks like it's going behind the water, but it changes when the science changes. But it's amazing. It's so amazing. So, of course, I agree that we cannot say that what the Quran says is, what the tafsir says is necessarily what Allah meant, but it's a helpful resource to understand like a straightforward interpretation of it based on experts. So if the experts got it wrong, like what are we gonna do, right? Quickly, someone asked a question. Are we gonna see a major wave of apostasy in our lifetime? We are seeing this. Like Shariq, myself, like all of us, we are the apostasy wave. Right, like Murad, we had Murad on the channel some time ago. It'd be nice to get all of us at once, and a few other friends that we have that we've been talking to privately. Shariq, do you know a lot of ex-Muslims like
Who
that
may
didn't come out? Do you know any like?
not that
So
I, I I know a few.
for me, like 99% are in the closet.
Yeah.
Like seriously, like 99. I don't know if it's 99 or 95 or 90, but like everybody I know is in the closet, except for you
Yeah.
and me and a few people that came on the channel and stuff. But it's
No, yeah.
changing. Things are changing. Islam is being reformed as well by certain individuals. Actually, they don't want to say it's being reformed because reform is a four-letter word in the Muslim community, bid'ah. But Islam is being reformed because people are now saying things like Hamza Yusuf says we shouldn't do hudud anymore, like chopping off the hand or killing apostates, or like that stuff doesn't apply anymore. And how does it not apply? Because the goals of Sharia are to preserve life, preserve lineage, whatever. So in order to keep those goals, which are the bigger goals, we're going to throw out the rulings. Now, of course, Hizb ut-Tahrir and Islamists will be like, Astaghfirullah, kafir, Hamza Yusuf is kafir. How dare he say we don't do hudud? They want to be chopping off hands. They're like happy to chop off hands and stone adulterers. To them, Islam is as like their Islam is pathetic. It's just like it's just stupidity Islam. Sorry, they're not gonna like me saying that. That's what it is. It's shallow, short-sighted bullshit Islam. That's what Islamism is. The Islam that I want to see is like Hamza Yusuf and like Mufti Abu Layth, reformed,
I have a lot of
inspired.
time for these guys, actually. Those two in particular, I have a lot of time for them. I like listening to them. Abu
Yeah,
Lev is just, it's like, I'm like, this is cool, man. This guy's cool. I can listen to him. And Hamza Yusuf is just very relaxing to listen to. I may not agree with half the stuff, but they're coming from a decent place. And I would rather have someone like that trying to find people their way in a modern society than someone being dogmatic about being an atheist, if that makes sense. You
yes,
know, like somebody
yeah.
who's trying to take everybody together, then somebody is like, ah.
We had
So,
I've had my own terrible experiences with like cultish atheists.
oh yes, I know.
But I'm very much against and you too, we are against cultish atheists because
Yeah,
it's not about being in a group. Like we humans are
yeah,
so tribal. Like if some
absolutely.
woman wants to embrace Islam, by all means, or some man wants to become Muslim, by all means, I don't think it's good for you, but I respect you. And I'm not gonna like bash you for like
Yeah,
that's what atheists do a lot. Like it just becomes like another toxic religion where it's like
yeah.
a cult where, oh, you can't leave my cult of atheism. Like
There are
yeah.
some like that, unfortunately. There are quite a few like that. And now that we've said this, now that you and I have said this, now suddenly we're both going to be Pakistanis or something like that. It happens all the time. You say something like this, or say, don't kill all Muslims. There's no need to kill every single Muslim. Or you're a Pakistani. That's what I get all the time. I'm like, I'm just tired of being called a Pakistani all the time. Not that there's nothing automatically wrong with being Pakistani. You're like, guys, do your research. Um, so yeah.
So
Mhm.
someone's asking, when am I debating Muhammad Hijab? Farhan, a good friend of ours, Farhan Qureshi, is going to have a debate with Muhammad Hijab. Farhan Qureshi is an ex-Muslim. He's a Hindu. He's a perennialist. He's a spiritual guy. And I very much like him. He's a very good friend of both of us. And so I'm just waiting for him to have his debate. Like, I haven't thought about debating. Like, I'm not just going around looking for people to debate. Like, I don't mind. I could do it, sure, whatever. But anyways, let them have the debate, and maybe I'll do it in the future. Maybe I won't, but sure, why not? Like, by all means. Yeah, someone's asking what we mean by cultish atheists. I just mean like by cultish atheists, I just mean like atheists would turn atheism into a religion in the sense that they don't respect people's choices. Like a good example is somebody that leaves Islam, sorry, becomes Muslim again, and they're like, oh, he wasn't a true atheist. Like, where have I heard this before? Oh, he didn't become atheist for the right reasons. Well, maybe,
That's
but
when,
that
yeah.
how do you know? Like, how do you know? Did you talk to this person? No, I just know, like, because they no true atheist would ever leave atheism. What? Like, it's like I've gone from one religion to another.
There are
Like,
there are people like that,
and
unfortunately. Thankfully, I don't think most people, but yeah.
yeah, and like a good example is people that like they have to put you in a box. Either you're atheist or you're believer or you're like agnostic is some people say agnostic is atheist without balls. Like,
Yeah.
no,
No, just an
no.
honest position. No, honestly, that's what I am. That's what I truly, truly am.
Atheist without
Can I?
balls.
Now, you'd have to take that without evidence because I'm not really going to present any evidence. But no, I do have the balls. What I mean is agnostic. I think that's an honest position. Do I think
Yes.
there's a paternalist God who's going to burn you if you eat bacon? No, no, definitely not. But and if there is also, that has no bearing on my life because I have better standards for any deity who wants to run my life. But could there be some creator? Sure. But it's
Yeah.
just it's honest, and that's why we shouldn't be getting too caught up in these labels and tribes. And are you a true atheist? Are you a true non-believer? That sort of stuff really upsets me, which is why secularism is much more important to me than
Yes.
these tags that people
Yes.
need to have.
And someone I respect very much, Sam Harris, he
Mhm.
doesn't even use he said, I don't even use that term atheist. Like it's there, like it's
Neither
there
do I.
somewhere.
Neither do I. I mean, if someone asks me, "Are you an atheist?" Yes, sure. But I mean, I can't remember who came up with that. That's like saying my favorite sport is not playing golf. I think it was Ali Rizvi who came up with that one. I can't remember who it was. Well, that's a great analogy. I don't go around telling people what I don't do. I don't believe in alchemy. So it's a technical point. What's more important is the things that I do hold important, which is secular values, humanist
Yes,
values, and so that's
yes,
why if you ask me, I'd say secular humanist
absolutely. And
first. Yeah,
I I used to have all this on my Twitter and Facebook as well. Atheist, agnostic, secular humanist. I'm just like,
yeah.
I just removed it all.
Does it
I'm like,
matter? Yeah. Does it
whatever.
matter? Yeah, I
I'm
don't think
Abdullah
it
Samir.
matters.
I'm ex
Yeah,
admin and founder of Light Upon Light and verse by verse Quran.
yeah.
That's it. My blog is abdullahsamir.com. You can look me up. I had like more rarely I get a lot of Muslims telling me change your name, which is like so silly. Like
I
that's the
know.
most important thing in your life. You're gonna tell me change my name? Like what you want? It's like they don't realize like how ridiculous that is. That's like saying, and one guy told me, oh, you should put atheist on your Twitter. Why? So everyone knows the atheist. Like you're asking me to put a badge on me, like atheist. Like, do you realize how bad that sounds? I
I
don't think you
know.
realize how bad that sounds. Like, buddy, everyone can see I'm atheist. They just gotta look at my blog. I don't need to broadcast that I'm atheist. Why don't you want people? Yeah, I want people to know I'm atheist, but I'm not like I'm tired of the identity politics now. Like, whatever. Like,
Yeah,
that's just cheap points, like you said, right? Like,
yeah.
look at my arguments. Forget who the hell I am. Am I Muslim or ex-Muslim
Yeah,
or
if
this?
there's for example, hypothetically, if there's a mufti, he's a mufti from, I don't know, Al Azhar University, but he has a wholesome view, an evidence-based view on climate change, am I going to say that, oh no, let's not listen to him because he's not a true skeptic because he's still a believer? No, it doesn't matter. Does it really matter? I don't think so. I think we should take each position that people have and engage with that and discuss that and see whether that has any merit. And they equally might have other positions which don't, and that's okay.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And that's a genetic fallacy. Like if someone's saying I don't accept what you're saying because you're
because
ex-Muslim. Hello. So why should I accept anything you say as a Muslim? Like you're biased too, buddy. We're all biased. Like you're even more well, we're both equally biased. You love Islam. I don't like it and I don't believe in it. You believe in it. So let's all look at the arguments. Never mind
that's
who you
exactly
are,
that's all I care
because
about.
it's but Muslims are taught to be insular, like you said, right? Like it's I mean not, you
Yeah,
didn't say that exactly, but like that's a self-protective mechanism, right?
that is.
And
Yeah,
someone's asking how do these reformists reconcile being a Muslim and putting aside fiqh and Sharia? But they don't consider that they're putting it aside. They're looking at the hook, like they're looking at the bigger maqasid, the pillars or the arkam, the bigger goals. So there's no like this is the thing about religion. It's like there's no right and wrong per se. My word is kind of as good as your word. Everyone has to kind of argue. Like, why should I believe one scholar or another scholar, right? So many Muslim scholars, and that's why, like I say, Islam is built up over 1400 years. The rules, the fiqh, the Sharia, all of these things were built up by scholars over the centuries. So then they don't think that they don't think that they're getting rid of Islam. They see it as like let's be honest. Salafism is gonna die because it's stupid, it's backwards, it's black and white, and it doesn't fit in society. It's antagonistic, it's hostile, it's separatist, it's but what these guys are doing, as much as some Muslims hate them, they're actually saving Islam. Like Mufti Abu Layth and Hamza Yusuf and all these guys, they're saving Islam because they're changing it. I mean, they'll probably not like the fact I'm saying they're changing it. And from their perspective, they're not changing it. They're just going by the goals, the bigger picture, whatever. I don't buy it. They can sell that if they want, and if people buy it, good for them. I don't personally think there's any value in we're on the same page here. But they see it as, I don't know. And there's another. I hate to be. I'm a very optimistic person, and not just optimistic. I take people at their face value, what they say. But like, there's another possibility that like some of these scholars don't believe in Islam, right?
Mm, mm,
What would be the gain for them to tell you that?
mm,
There's no gain. Like,
mm.
they might as well just continue the Islamic
Yeah.
classes and whatever.
Yeah, once I mean, people work all sorts of jobs in the corporate world. Is their heart and their soul 100% in it? No, it's a job. And for many, for many scholars or muftis or imams, etc., it's their job. And if you were able to have a private conversation, would they still say the same things? Would they have any doubts? I think the conversation would be very different if you were able to have that sort of conversation. Any more
Absolutely.
questions? We should
So
be.
yeah, you're
Yeah.
yawning. It's I think it's time for bed.
Who,
Thank
me?
you.
Did I yawn? I didn't realize that. No, it's
Do you
fine.
want to add anything or share any links, anything like that?
There was a topic. Maybe it's too late now. Maybe there'll have to be another chat. We were going to talk something about Islamic finance, but
Oh
no.
no, we missed it. That was such an interesting topic.
Yes.
So guys, Shariq he's like almost like an expert on finance and Islamic finance. Used to be an investment banker. I'm so sorry to do this to you at the moment we're going offline. We were going to talk about Islamic finance and like, is it great or is it like stupid, and why we think that. I have like, I'm not a finance guy. I'm like a computer guy, but like, I have a very much a personal interest in finance as well, and I was kind of involved as like a hobby in Islamic finance and stuff. So it's a topic very close to my heart. One of my family members is spending like a hell of a lot of money on Islamic mortgage, and I feel bad about that. But let's do another one just on this topic.
Possibly, yeah. I think there's enough there. Maybe for maybe not 2 hours, but
Yeah, and maybe to make it easier, we could also do on the weekend, because weeknights it gets late, and work in the morning and stuff like that. But I do appreciate. Is there anything else you want to add about anything you want to?
no. Actually, I was just looking at the questions. There was a death threat that kept coming up, which is it's
Was
always
it?
someone's trying.
Oh,
Yeah, somebody said ISIS will kill you and trying to
um,
report the.
oh yeah, I've been deleting those, and Beach
Yes, I see.
Price, who is also a moderator, has been deleting them.
All right,
So
right.
maybe I am getting death threats. I'm just not noticing them.
I
I'm
saw
still,
some. I feel like it just keeps it real, I just like, because otherwise that might mean, people aren't taking this seriously. So,
yeah,
and but
absolutely.
yeah,
Okay,
that's fine.
so it's been a wrap, folks. It's been fun. It was a great conversation. We really got into it, and definitely want to do this again. And so thanks for tuning in. Thanks everyone. Have a good night. If you haven't seen my blog, do check out my blog at abdullahsamir.com. Thanks for subscribing and following me on social media. Thank you so much, Shariq. It's been a pleasure.
No, my pleasure. It's the first time I've ever done anything like this, by the way. So I had fun.
Absolutely. And let's do another one. Let's do one on Islamic finance, and let's do another one where we get like Murad and a few other people, and we'll have like a
Oh
group
yeah,
conversation.
that should be interesting.
That'll be great. Okay, everyone. Good night.
Thanks, guys. Thanks.